You've got just a short list of bills in front of you. The first piece of legislation involves athletic fields and program open space and state funds. And what the bill does is it allows stateside capital POS, program open space funds, specifically to be used for maintaining grass fields. It does the same when it comes to the local POS funds. It just writes in that statute. Then there's a section at the very end of the bill that specifies that state and locals for public projects must give a preference to natural surface materials on playgrounds and athletic fields. And then a final section of the bill that basically says no state funds may be used basically from here on for renovations or for new playground or athletic fields for synthetic fields, for synthetic surfaces. And so that's the piece of legislation. County Executive supports this piece of legislation.
Okay, can we have Ms. Essie McGuire, do you mind joining us, because there was just some questions about the position of the board? Good afternoon. Can you tell us what is the position of the board, or if there are any other conversations happening?
Thank you. So yes, when the board took up this bill, the primary concern really was around the playground aspect of it. Certainly, alternative surfaces on our playgrounds are very important to the school system, largely for accessibility issues. So that was really the primary focus of the board's concern. Also, I think the board, the board is concerned about the prohibitions on spending funds for different portions of project, and really the board as a whole supports the local jurisdiction's ability to maintain authority and control over those kinds of decisions at the local level, and would prefer to work with our local agencies and governing bodies around how to structure those kinds of projects. So that's really that was the other part of the board's position on this bill, but the board really is more concerned about the playground aspects of it.
And so did the board choose to support the bill with amendments, or?
Yes, thank you. The board's position was to support with amendments, really the amendments, again, focusing on having that element available for playground support with alternative surfaces, and then again, with the ability to maintain local control over the final outcome of projects.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate MCPS's desire to try to be responsive to what you hear from a variety of different quarters, but I think this bill would be a big mistake for us. You know, a few years ago, we passed a resolution that really the intent was to say no more tire crumb. And I think there's a lot of legitimate concerns about tire crumb as a fill for these fields. And after we passed that resolution, we started to see the construction of fields that are made with other materials. We have cork, we have zeolite, we have other materials that don't involve something as problematic as tire crumb. I thought at the time that was going to address the concern, but instead what we've seen is a really unrelenting, uncompromising campaign to prevent the construction of any surface that is not grass or dirt, and that just doesn't work in every location. And the idea that we couldn't get state funding for something that we need to do because that's the best solution for that location is problematic. Why would we want to have our projects ineligible for state funding when we determine that that's the appropriate solution? So I just think that we've taken the appropriate and responsible action to say the tire crumb should not be a fill in these fields. And I think we should draw the line there and, stick to that. So I don't support this.
Okay. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Madam President. I concur with Councilmember Reamer on this. I have some experience with synthetic turf fields, know a lot about them, and know a lot about the issues surrounding them, but also on general play surfaces as well. While I do believe there are legitimate concerns with synthetic surfaces, particularly how hot they get in July and August, I do think that the pros outweigh the cons, And there have not yet been, that I have seen, conclusive medical analysis on there being any sort of detrimental effects. Now, I know there is ongoing analysis, but I can tell you on the operations side, synthetic surfaces are critical to be able to carry out a reasonable baseline level of service for play, but also from an accessibility standpoint, particularly with our disability community as well, which is rapidly growing here in the county. This past year, there was a record number of cancellations of leagues and games because of the rain that we had in the county. And while I do personally have a preference for grass fields, the practical reality is that some combination of both would put the county in an undeniably better position to be able to serve the needs of our growing community. And not being able to have kids or our residents be able to access these fields at all is not a solution either. And so I think the industry has come a long way in producing organic materials, which previous council I give a lot of credit to for stepping up and providing as a model nationally that other jurisdictions are now following, and I know this through the National Association of Counties. The resolution that our council took is a resolution that's being adopted across the country, and I think is a reasonable one. And at the North Potomac Community Center, as an example, we do have a synthetic surface there that is made entirely of organic materials and it is not as hot in the summer and does allow for accessibility and play all year round, which I think is very important. So there's no perfect solution here, but entirely shutting the door on state resources I think is short-sighted, and I do think we as a local jurisdiction have the means and the expertise to make decisions on our own, and that is why I am opposed to this bill, and at a minimum would urge my colleagues to consider not taking a position at all if there is some opposition to that or contention.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We've spent a lot of time on this issue, years, talking about the direction, and so I'm not going to reiterate the points that Councilmember Albornoz made because his were very well stated. I'll just piggyback everything that he said, but then also just state that even the board's position in terms of supporting with amendments, I mean, Ms. McGuire, quite honestly, your amendments would basically strip the entire bill and would make the bill just basically say that, you know, we support to the maximum extent practical, giving consideration and preference to natural surface materials, which really is what we do in practice now. And so from that perspective, then the bill doesn't need to be a bill. It's in current practice what we do here in Montgomery County. I'm not sure about the rest of the state. Some of them do that. And so realistically, from my perspective, the most practical thing for us to do would be to oppose the bill. The bill doesn't really exist without the prohibition, and the prohibition is something that, again, would be incredibly problematic. Not just from the standpoint of creating new fields, but the other part that's incredibly troubling is about replacement and understanding that in some communities where we've made a commitment and certainly have partnered with our community who have raised their own funds to help to do this, us stepping away from that commitment to our constituency isn't something that we want to do, nor do we want to support the state stepping away from their support of their constituency. And so from that perspective, on financial measures, I would also oppose the bill.
Okay, our council staff has recommended that we oppose the bill. Is there any objection to following that recommendation? Councilmember Jawando.
I think, agree with Councilmember Albernoz's position of, or suggestion, secondary suggestion of no position. You know, respecting the board's chiming in to Councilmember Rice's point, I understand. I do think fields are preferable, but not always practical. So, but you know, I am uncomfortable with us opposing this. I would like to recommend that we have no position.
Okay, we can take a vote. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate the perspectives and to Councilmember Rice's comment that this has been an ongoing discussion for some of you, and for some of us have not been knee-deep in it, and the point regarding the Board of Education muddling the language leaves me confused as to what actually this legislation of the proposed amendments would actually do, and I would second my colleague Jawando's comments to have no position on it.
Okay, Councilmember,
I move that we oppose the bill if someone hasn't already moved it. I think we need to be clear. I think we need to articulate a position here and let that be known, because I really like the comments that I heard from Mr. Albornoz and Mr. Rice. You made a lot of very important points there. A lot of this also is about this unrelenting campaign that does not actually have a modest compromise as its goal. And I think we've got to be clear that there is a good way to use this and there's a bad way, and we favor the good way to use this, and that's why we're sending a message.
okay, so there's been a motion by Councilmember Reamer that has been seconded by Councilmember Rice to oppose the bill, which is what the council staff recommended. All those in favor of opposition, please raise your hand. That's Councilmember Albornoz, Rice, Katz, Navarro, and Reamer. All those opposed?
To opposition?
Yes. Councilmember Glass, Jawando, and Friedson, so passes with opposition to the bill.
The next piece of legislation basically codifies a program in the state statute, a Bikeways Network program, and allows for funding of the program so that there would be $7.7 million when the program's ultimately phased in, as far as the funding is concerned, in fiscal year -- to provide grants and also provide for the cost of administering the program. Also, interestingly, it's got one provision on it that allows, of those amounts, $100,000 to be provided to counties and municipalities to help them actually apply for the grants. So, county executive supports the piece of legislation.
Okay. All right, any comments from my colleagues regarding this bill? Council staff is recommending that we support this particular bill. Any opposition to that, any objection to that? Okay, so we will support it.
Okay, the next piece of legislation, I think you're, certainly the council before the floor knew or familiar with it, because you passed a program that also creates matches for this purpose. It's the Small Business Innovation Research and Technology Transfer Incentive Program. So we have, technology companies that get federal grants. The county now has a program that matches those federal grants, and the state is now creating a program that looks almost identical to the program you created to provide state matches. And the county executive supports this piece of legislation.
All right, any questions or comments from my colleagues? Looks like everybody's giving a thumbs up, so without objection, we will support this.
Kathleen's got the next bill.
Madam President, council members, so on to House Bill 983, SB 898, dealing with officer-involved deaths. This bill would require any law enforcement agency to develop a written policy regarding how to handle officer-involved deaths. That written policy must require that investigations of officer-involved deaths be performed by at least 2 independent investigators who are not employed by the law enforcement agency for which the officer who's involved in the death works. The investigators must have experience conducting complex criminal investigations. As soon as possible after completing that investigation, the independent investigators must submit a report to the state's attorney. If the state's attorney decides that there is not sufficient cause to move forward with prosecution, the state's attorney is required to release the final report, but has the ability to redact what is called confidential information under the bill. The bill specifically says that it does not prohibit the normal kind of internal review of police conduct under the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. Chief Manger,
Right there,
Chief Manger is here.
the other side.
And I'll just share with you the county executive's position, and then Chief Manger is the most important person here. So we did talk to the county executive this morning, and because of concerns that the chief shared with the county executive, He is supporting the concepts in this bill, but asking for amendments